my free hot water system. It consists of a reservoir filled with glycol, antifreeze, okay? It's just a 2-gallon container, and I keep it full to about 1.5 inches below the top. There's no need to fill it. The less than 2 gallons is fine. You can see my heater hoses with brass fittings and hose clamps, and I use a special high heat thread sealant underneath there, wherever we have that type of a temperature range. And then there's the water heater, and I put a light on it so you can see it. It's a closed loop system. What that means is we're pumping the antifreeze from this reservoir with a 12-volt Bosch water pump. We pump it up to the front of the van. This is on when the engine is running. And what it does is it passes through a heat exchanger. My cold glycol passes through one side of the heat exchanger, and I cut the chassis coolant lines into the other side of the heat exchanger. So the hot 215-degree ProMaster antifreeze is running through one side of the heat exchanger. My cold antifreeze is running through from the other direction, like this. And of course, what does a heat exchanger do? We're exchanging the heat. The chassis glycol is hotter than my glycol. They want to equalize when they pass and touch. The glycols never touch. They're in separate channels that are wrapped in a series of copper plates. So what happens is when that hot glycol comes through, it heats the copper, and my cold glycol picks up that heat and comes all the way back to the water heater. There's another heat exchanger. There's a coil in this water heater, and that antifreeze passes through the hot water. Again, it's not mixing with our water. That's our drinking water, our shower water. It's just a closed coil that's inside, submerged in that water. That's the garage under the bed. When we travel past the bulkhead, the van bulkhead, see, this is the end of the aisle. I've got a cabinet down the end of the aisle on the galley, and this is where the front of the water heater resides. And you'll have full access to all of this once the van is complete, which is the whole point of my builds. That's where all my water manifolds will go with shutoff valves. There's that little black pump. So you can see the hose line, the radiator hose line, coming from the reservoir into the pump. Then I send it down through these canals, these storm drains that are on either side of the van. It's a great place to run tubing and hoses. These water heaters are from the marine world, okay? Still good? Good. They put these on boats. When you're running your boat and you're headed out to the canyon for a 3-day fishing trip, you're making hot water because it sends the engine coolant or the seawater coolant. A lot of engines are cool. It's seawater out on the water, the boats. Sends it through here and heats the water. Free hot water, so to speak. As long as the engine is running, you'll make hot water with this system. And it's a simple system to put in place. We're talking about heater hose, radiator hose, okay, from the reservoir. One of these hoses, there's 2 outlets here. So the glycol comes out one, goes to the pump. This reservoir needs to be the highest component in the system. So now it goes down the tube to the pump. The pump is always ready. It's always primed because there's always antifreeze there because it's lower than the reservoir. Gravity pumps it up. Now, why do I have a heat exchanger? Why do I have all this extra hosing? Why don't I just cut my chassis lines and bring them back to this water heater? You can do that, but now you're driving and you're deep in the desert. You're somewhere in Montana, and one of those lines gets cut. One of those coolant lines gets cut, gashed, and you lose your engine coolant. Your van's inoperable. With my system, if this coolant line under the van gets cut, you just can't make hot water with the glycol pump system. But your van is still operable because all I did up at the van is I cut the coolant line and put it into one end of the heat exchanger and out the other end. So here is the chassis glycol reservoir, right? And right next to it here is my heat exchanger. In the case of a ProMaster, they give you this nice mounting bracket right there. Now, we made this bracket but they gave you a nice little place to mount it. So you can see that heat exchanger is really only about 1.5 inches thick. And what are we talking about here? It's maybe 3 by 7, 3.5 by 7 inches. And you can see on the other side, it has my connections, my hose connections. So the chassis glycol enters through this side and exits that side. My glycol comes in on this side and exits that way. And that's where they do their mixing, right in there. So the chassis side, you know, this hose was really only connected right over there in the chassis. I just made a cut, connected one end here, connected the other end over here. Lou did this for me. Lou made the bracket too. So that is a nice, tidy place to put that heat exchanger in a ProMaster. I didn't add any hose or anything. Just cut it and put it on either end of the heat exchanger. So there's no failure there. My coolant lines run under the van, and I did that for 2 reasons. Main reason is I have room under there. There's no way I could run these lines up through the van. Second reason is that allows this system to be tunable. So when you're driving and making this hot water, there's a number of things you can do. If it's winter time, you can insulate that hosing with foam pipe insulation. You can get it at the depot. Comes in like a 5-foot length, 4-foot length. You get a bundle of it. You could zip tie that all the way down and insulate that hose. So in the winter, the glycol stays warmer because it's another heat exchanger down there, right? That's what we're doing. It's a fair sense of exchange. In the summertime, you can take that insulation off, right? If it's still too hot, you can purchase these Billet Intercoolers. Okay, this is a small one, 3/4 inch, so it fits my hose diameter. But this is basically a heat sink, a radiator for your hose line. So you could put 1, 2, 3, 4 of these. You got to cut them into the hose, right? You'll have to refill your glycol. But if you've got the wind passing over these intercoolers, you're going to cool down that glycol before it gets here. So make sure you put these on the right leg. There's 2 hoses going up front. One is traveling to the front of the van. The other one's coming back with the heat. It's easy to tell which is which. The one coming back from the van, from the chassis, is hotter than the one going up to the van. So you would put this on that hotter leg that's coming back, and you would be cooling down that glycol before it hits this guy. For a ProMaster, for instance, it's 215 degrees up there. The chassis glycol operates at 215 degrees. So when my glycol steals heat from it and comes back to this water heater, then returns to the reservoir for the cycle to begin again, it's 170 degree water that we're making. Okay, to put that in perspective, when you buy a water heater at the Home Depot or a plumber is bringing you one to install, the water heater for your residence comes out of the factory at 140 degrees. When the plumber does the install, he generally tempers it down to 120 degrees. This water is 170. Now, these water heaters come with a mixing valve on the other end, so you can temper the water. You can have 120 degree water coming out of this. It mixes the hot and the cold at the other end. I say nay, nay, because in my mind, now 170 degree water is dangerous. You could scald yourself with that. But in my mind, if this water is that hot, you're going to use less of it. Temper at the faucet, temper at the shower. That way you'll use far less hot water for any single event, and it will last longer. Dave and Irene from the Vagabonds, Carry On Vagabond, I put one of these systems in their van, smaller. This is a 5.5. I think they've got a 4.5 gallon system. They can go 2 days with hot, like in other words, if they drive to a campsite and they're going to stay for 2 days, they've got hot water for 2 days. This stays hot for that length of time. And there's also a 750 watt heating element in here. It's 120 volt. It's electric, okay? So if you were camped somewhere for 2 weeks, obviously you're not running your engine, so you're not making hot water. Turn on the breaker, turn on the inverter, and make your hot water through the inverter. It's only 750 watts. Takes a little longer, but it's okay. You got solar on the roof. You got plenty of battery power in the Mama Luke. So this is a really nice system. When you live in a van dwellers, this is your daily driver. This thing's running daily. The engine's running daily. You're going somewhere. Make your own hot water. It's free. The drawback. What's one problem with this system? This reservoir is 170 degrees of glycol, okay? So it takes a while for it to cool down. So you're driving for 2 or 3 hours. You get to your campsite where you're going to hang for a night or two. It's the dead of summer. This thing's giving off heat in your van. It's in the garage. And what I've come to do, once Dave complained to me because the bed goes here, and this thing was right under Dave's feet, and he was getting hot feet. It's nice in the winter, but not in the summer. So I sent them, I made up a shoebox of 1-inch foam insulation. I pre-cut it, and I shipped it to them. I also shipped them a blanket, a thin slate blanket, although it's not necessary, but I sent them a blanket to wrap around the water heater as well. So that seems to take care of the problem of heating your mattress, okay? It's like radiant heat. You'd like it in the winter. It's like a hot water bottle in your bed or a hot brick.